Volume 2 Chapter 11. Shiltir moaned with pleasure when the vampire bride finished her off. The pale flesh of her familiar was cool to the touch, and yet to the diminutive true vampire guardian, only one thing could have been hotter. Lord Ines. My lord. My love. His fine calcium bones, their perfect structure, that glorious red orb. Not to mention those penetrating red eyes. It was all glorious. Shiltir thought the word, but shouted only a desperate banshee like "Ya-ah." Her little hands tightened on the head of the dark-haired familiar whose final desperate flicks of her tongue sent her mistress over the edge. In the throes of passion, she felt the skull crack in her hands. Her climax, and the unlife of the familiar, had both reached their end. She banished the summon to dispose of the unmoving corpse, and then crinkled her nose. They may call me a pervert, Shiltir thought with quiet dignity, but even I don't like to stink. And with that thought, she went off to the baths. The baths of Nazarick were as decadent as Neuronist's room was painful. The rising heat of the water kept a constant fog of steam that thickened the deeper into it that you went. No true barrier to the vision of the ones who used them, it was a nod to the idea of privacy. Not that Shiltir cared if she was seen when she peeled off her dress in the changing room and exited again. The soft earth gave in under even her light weight, the bending blades of grass caressed the bottoms of her feet like a lover's touch. The smooth white tile marked her path into the wet, and she sank into it with a sigh. You really should use a towel, a matronly voice said from within the steam in deeper waters. Shiltir followed the voice and her lips tightened in restrained displeasure. Technically her superior, Albedo was also her rival. She was also a source of significant envy to the vampire. Shiltir's eyes went immediately to Albedo's chest. The succubus batted her wings, sending little waves of water in the direction of the vampire. Look all you like, Albedo said and stood up, a haughty expression on her smiling face. Her hands were on her hips. Though not a tall woman, the succubus was a powerful warrior. That way you can easily see why Lord Ines will choose me over you. Why? You're even smaller than the little waves I sent over to you. No wonder you pad your bra. Shiltir fumed and felt the urge to cover her chest, her one insecurity. Maybe I need pads, but mine don't sag either. She gave a lecherous look at the demoness and leaned forward, her eyebrows rising and falling, her smile one of absolute mockery. Albedo turned red in the face. They don't sag. My body is perfect, yours on the other hand. Albedo approached and looked down at the pale vampire. If mine is a feast, yours is an empty plate. Shiltir glared up at the dripping wet beauty. The water flowed over the contours of her breasts, and slipped down over her smooth belly to rejoin the waters of the women's baths. The vampire guardian raised a fist, then brought out her finger, pointing at Albedo. She wanted to speak. Shiltir tried to think of something, anything to say back. She couldn't. Her finger fell back into the fist, and her hands fell to her sides. Her wits failed her and she sank into the water, defeated. Albedo didn't feel the rush of triumph over her rival. If anything, she felt like a bully. Rival or not, that stung. A fight is a fight, but too far is too far. The guardian overseer lowered herself into the water as well, wondering what to say, and hoping her wits did not let her down. A proposal? Arch repeated the words with as much dismay as relief. You can come up off of your knees first, Sebos said, and she slowly rose in time with a blush to her face. When she did, she darted her eyes left to right and then, still acutely aware of the hand that had not released her wrist, she gingerly sat down on the couch beside him again. Arch had a difficult time meeting his eyes until he released his hold over her wrist. When he did, with a heavy slowness she brought it back and folded her fingers into her palms and set the knuckles against one another. Arch's lower lip quivered as the shame of her forwardness and desperation ran rampant for several seconds before he spoke. That is better now, isn't it? Sebos's voice retained its dignity, and yet was somehow warmer. Arch gave him a tiny, fearful nod. Why don't you start by telling me everything? Then I'll explain what I mean, Sebos suggested, and under his penetrating gaze, there was nothing she could do but pour out her heart. Arch told him everything. Her family's fall, her father's spending and rising debts to cover his lost status, her mother's slightly lesser spending that was centered around trying to net a wealthy husband for Arch herself. The risk to her sisters, the slave auctions that had taken nobles who refused to bow to their changing situations, and the dark looming fate that was waiting just beyond the hill when her father's debts were called in. She spoke of her connection to Foresight, becoming a worker, leaving the academy. She confessed everything as if he were an interrogator, or as if he were a temple priest to whom she had to unburden herself in safety. Sabos felt like both depending on what Arch was about to say, and finally it was done down to that night. So I was supposed to seduce you. The hope was that having damaged my worth, or even impregnated me, you would do the proper noble thing and marry me. Then. She looked away, out into the stars. Then my sisters would be safe. Life as a worker is hard and dangerous. We don't get the support of guild investigators. We don't have any security. We're disposable heroes. My talent carried me a long way, but there is never a tomorrow promised to people in my position. Arch gave Sabos a wry, half-proud smile and relaxed as if a great weight had lifted from her shoulders. Arch extended a hand outward towards Sabos again and closed the other into a tight fist that turned her tan fingers white. That's everything, Lord Tian. I tried, I failed, and I humiliated myself and disgraced whatever was left of my ruined family name along the way. I guess all I can say is that I'm sorry. If it had worked, if you really did rescue my sisters, I'd have spent my life trying to make up for trapping you tonight. Her head hung in defeat. Really? Especially because I simply don't look like a noble anymore. Do you like being a worker? Sabos asked, interest peeked over her last words. Some of it. Arch admitted readily, though the shiver of excitement suggested it was more than some. My teammates are more like family than my parents. We lay our lives down for one another, we've saved each other's lives countless times, and there's a satisfaction to getting things for myself. I don't have to bow or scrape to my father, I earn my life. I don't need to depend on someone else. I'm not really fit to be a nobleman's wife anymore, no matter how I was raised. Arch didn't spit when she said the last sentence, but Sabos felt her scorn for the idea, so it was unsurprising when she laughed. Look how I messed up tonight. I couldn't even walk in a way to draw your eye, let alone anything else. When the laughter began to fade, she rested her hand on his thigh. Whatever your offer, Lord Tian, thank you for not making a mockery of my disgraceful self tonight. I'm truly thankful. You really are a great man, and you'd make a noble woman very, very proud as a husband, I am sure, Arch said with a well of gratitude that overflowed from her lips. Sabos inclined his head in a slight, lordly nod of acceptance. How far would you go, to save your sisters? I was going to give up the life I liked, to have my mother's life, Lord Tian. To stop my father's folly from destroying them, I'd even be a concubine. I'm the only one who can properly protect their happiness. Arch hissed the promise out and rose her eyes to his. He searched her face and found no reservations. Would you put your comrades to the test? Even knowing they might not pass? Sabos probed, and Arch pursed her lips shut tight. I don't own their lives, but if it is a test I know they'll pass, I think they would forgive me that. Arch responded with a tentative uncertainty. Swear your life, your soul, your magic, your talents, your everything, and swear to put your comrades to the test, and I will see your sisters saved. Sabos offered. What of my parents? Arch asked. In a few days, I'll let them decide for themselves. But first, you must ask for it yourself. You must, out of your own strength, ask for the help you need, and put everything on the line for it. Sabos gave the instruction, and Arch searched his face as he had searched her own. She searched for cruelty, she searched for malice, she searched for plans to hurt those she loved, and found no evil. Is this what they call a leap of faith, Lord Tian? Arch asked through a pounding heart. I believe so, Arch, I believe so. Now, will you make the leap, or do I walk out without your word? I won't offer this a second time, I promise you, Sabos said without any reservation nor hint of compromise. You swear, nothing bad will happen to my sisters, no matter what? She asked. They'll have happiness. Arch pressed the question, leaning close enough that she could feel the breath coming past his lips to caress her face. In my master's name, I swear. Sabos made his vow, and Arch slowly stood up. She brought her hand up to her forehead and felt the dampness of sweat there, soaking past her glove. It's a deal then. I hope to the fore this isn't the biggest mistake of my life. Forgive me, Lord Tian, or may I call you Sabos? Archer's weak smile revealed the weary spirit that lived inside her flesh in that moment, and Sabos stood up as well. You may. Tomorrow, tell your parents that you failed, and that you're going on a job, then come to my home, and wait there. Sabos gave the order, and Arch could only bow, her throat suddenly dry and her eyes threatening to flood when the stress of the day hit her all at once. I'll see myself out, Sabos said. Seeing her distress, he reached for the door handle. Everything will be all right. With nothing else to do but watch him go, Arch could only give tiny nods and pray to the four that he was neither lying nor wrong. When she was alone, Arch went to her room, peeled off the dress she despised, wiped off the makeup she wore, and flung herself on a bed that had long ago begun to feel too soft for her to be comfortable in. Gods who watch over us. Please, please don't let this be a mistake. Arch prayed, and closed her eyes to sleep. Volume 2 Chapter 12. Remember what we said in the arena. We realized that it would be unnatural for a man like Lord Irons to have only one wife, Albedo said, holding up one finger, and then adding a second. That brightened the expression of the child-sized guardian, and Sheltir gave those words a thoughtful nod. Still, when will Lord Irons choose? He has been out of the tomb almost constantly for weeks now, and when he is here, She killed the thought. Albedo revived it. Lord Irons hasn't chosen to see you, any more than he has me. Has he? The succubus asked. It's torture. It made me wonder if we did something wrong. Sheltir bit her lower lip at that and looked up at the demoness, asking a quiet, did we? Maybe? Without knowing it? Albedo's answer was spoken with hushed horror. That question has haunted me more than I want to admit, Sheltir. First him going away with Lupus Regina, and when they first came back, she barely visited with her sisters. She remained with him in the arena, training. I concerned myself with the idea that a mere maid was stealing his affections, and I questioned Cocytus, but to no avail. Cocytus wasn't there, or wouldn't say or? Sheltir probed, but Albedo's answer brought some relief. Cocytus confirmed our Lord and Lupus Regina were in fact merely training. Our master was honing warrior skills, just like he said at the meeting, but why there was so much of it? I sensed he was holding something back. Something large, but he said he could say nothing. Albedo gritted her teeth. Even you know what that means. Sheltir's answer was quick. Lord Irons himself ordered silence. Albedo didn't say anything right away. She became pensive. You know something, don't you? Sheltir asked when she saw Albedo's face. The vampire guardian crossed her arms over her chest. The comfortable cleansing of the bath was forgotten in an instant at the possibility of answers to the mystery of their master's absences and constant warrior training. I do, but also I don't, Albedo admitted. Sheltir furrowed her brow, her red eyes stared unblinking up at the face of her superior. I don't understand. Have you concluded something from some sort of hint? Did someone say something? Please, Albedo. Sheltir asked with quiet urgency and a bite to her lower lip that drew a drop of blood that blended into the red almost imperceptibly well. Albedo swallowed and rubbed her forehead with her right hand. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and confessed. Every night he was away, I was visiting our master's room to roll around in the sheets so that when he returned, he would have my scent to enjoy. Without intending it, her voice became a little more proud and her chin went up a tiny bit. A succubus's scent is naturally alluring. I hoped to please him, entice him to fulfill his desires. Sheltir looked down into the clear waters of the steaming bath. That's cheating. We had a deal, no using skills or powers. Albedo couldn't help but smirk. No, I didn't. This happens naturally. I can no more change this than you can stop being a vampire. Still. Sheltir groused, but her thoughts returned to Albedo's alleged insight. What happened? Nothing. The bed went unused while he was away. But he must have stayed the night here at least once, because another natural emission reached him. I had a dream. Albedo dropped the word like it was a bomb, but Sheltir only held her blank expression. Albedo rolled her bright yellow eyes. Right, you wouldn't have done this. Listen to me. I am a succubus. Dreams are one way we unconsciously use our powers over those we desire. An erotic dream at night asleep makes them easier to seduce during the day. Do you get it? You mean you sent him a dream? Sheltir asked. That definitely feels like cheating. Albedo shook her head with vigor. Again, no, I can't directly control it, or at least, I don't think I can. I've had many erotic dreams of our master, but this was different. It was like it reached him, like we shared the dream. And this didn't happen before? Shaltir probed. The beginnings of understanding began to rise within. No, it didn't. I went to his room after he was gone again, and I smelled him, but not him. It had to be Lord Ain's, but there was the scent of flesh, man's flesh. I think he's found some way to give himself a form that can do things. Albedo let out a tiny squeal of excitement and clasped her hands together as if in prayer. She gazed to the heavens and let out a longing sigh. How he could have done it, I don't know, but I'm sure he has. Albedo added. Shaltir thought that over. Flesh was just not as appealing to her, and so exciting as it was in its own way, she needed more. So, why hasn't he done anything? He could have summoned either of us to his bed at any time. Perhaps he wants everything to be perfect, perhaps he is worried about getting lost in bliss and forgetting to take the world over the thrill of taking Nazarik's treasures for his decadent pleasure. The succubus shuddered with wanton desire. But Shaltir's doubts were unabated. That sounds wrong, she said in a small voice. I don't doubt your senses or the change, but I don't know. Have you talked with Demiurge or Pandora's actor about this? Albedo shook her head. No, you're the first. We did agree to share information, and this is as much as I can offer you. I'll also add that you should keep it secret as well. He'll tell us formally when he's ready. For now, just be ready for our final battle to see which of us is by our Lord's right hand, and which is merely the seat on which he rests himself. Shaltir had the sudden vision of herself on all fours, her master planted firmly on her back. A mere chair to a supreme being. She began to breathe harder. It would be such bliss. A reward like nothing else. I call first seat, Shaltir exclaimed, then caught Albedo's expression of outrage. Clearly the thought came to the winged beauty just as quickly. No. That honor will be mine, Albedo exclaimed, the splashing of water going on and on for quite some time. A stone's throw away, Aura scratched her head and remained back out of sight. Great, I'll need a bath after my bath thanks to those two. This'll be one of those days. She crinkled her nose, and waited for the battle of women to end. Archer's slumber was heavier than full plate armor, but that didn't stop her mother from waking her up. She felt the shaking of hands rocking her body back and forth, soft fingers clinging to her biceps. Despite the fact that the manicured nails dug into her skin, there was no pain, only an awareness of sharpness and pressure. The young magic caster's eyes began to flutter open and found the slender features of her worried mother hovering a few feet over her face. Worry lines were etched on her, and to her mother's credit, Arch saw a semblance of shame in the face of the woman who bore her. Did it work? Was all the matriarch of the family asked. Arch closed her eyes and shook her head slowly. He didn't want me. It was the truth, and it stung the young mage. She squeezed her eyes shut so she wouldn't see disappointment on her mother's face. But closing her eyes did nothing to hide the bellow of her father's anger out in the hallway. Archer's eyes flew open and her face turned to look past her mother toward the door. The knob was rattling as her father tried to open it. Arch began to sit up. Her mother moved backward to allow her daughter's legs to swing over the bed. It wasn't lost on the young woman that her mother's hands were shaking. She whispered her next words to her mother. He had to come too? Wasn't I humiliated enough, being thrown to a man older than my late grandfather like a piece of meat? My father has to come yell at me because I wasn't. Her face scrunched with disgust. Tasted? You had one job for this household. One job. Be a desirable marriage prize. If you'd done that years ago we might still be nobles. If you'd been a proper daughter we'd be safe now. Her father's voice kept bellowing from out in the hall. His flabby fists couldn't break down the door. His soft body, however, could make a lot of noise. Arch ignored both him and her shaking mother in favor of putting her gear on. She snatched up her staff from its resting place against the wall, and was no longer the daughter of a fallen house, but felt herself for who she was. An adventurer. I'm an adventurer now, she said to herself, and the quailing of her childhood when her father yelled at her, the shame of her mother's disappointment, began to recede. She ignored the invectives thrown at her for her previous evening's failure and gave her mother a long steady stare. You were right about one thing, mother, we do have duties. This is mine. I have a job to do, Arch said without remorse, and went to the door. She flung it open and found her father's fat fist held overhead ready to pound on the door. He froze, his mouth open to hurl whatever he planned to next, but he was struck dumb. Archie's hand came out, and she struck him with the back of her palm across his cheek, her eyes full of tears of rage. "Go die in a fire," she hissed. She was no warrior, and her slap would have been like the gentle tap of rain to someone like Hecaran or Roberdike or even Imina. But it staggered her soft-bodied father at a pace, and he brought his palm up to the red spot on his cheek where her hand fell. "I'm going to meet with my team for a job. Don't expect me back for some time," she said with the utmost contempt, "and when I come back, count yourself lucky if you get a single coin out of me. Go use your own body for gold if you love it so much. I'll never do that for you again." She spun on her heel and left the weeping and bellowing figures behind her. It was only their noise that followed her out of the house. So nobody saw when she went straight next door to the estate of the House of Tien, knocked on the door, and was admitted in by the most beautiful maid Arch had ever seen. "She's like a doll," Arch thought, looking over the maid that introduced herself as Solution. That one managed the walk that Arch could only fumble through. Everything about the woman was exotic, erotic, proud and beautiful. Golden curls bounced with every rolling of her hips and every single step seemed designed to entice the watcher. If I could have moved like that. No wonder I failed. Even if I could move like that, Lord Tien has this to occupy him, no wonder I couldn't win him over. It was a somewhat unpleasant line of thought that carried on until she was led into a study. The slender arm of the maid waved her in, and she then retreated, leaving Arch alone with the target of her failed seduction. It was enough to make the mage blush at the memory, and shuffle her feet a little like a child caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. Sabos waved her to one of the chairs in the study. Unlike her library, this one was filled with rows of books that were slid tight against the shelves. Arch looked at it with open admiration, and when he saw what she did, he spoke. "My father, he was very, very wise. He had a saying, that the best bookends are two walls. I suppose I inherited my love of reading from him." Sabos didn't smile when he spoke, but there was a sparkle to his eyes that made Arch comfortable when she looked at him. "Lord Tien, about last night," Arch began, but it was waved away immediately. "You never need to mention it again, I understand. People will do a great deal for those they love, it's why I've chosen to give you a chance," Sabos said, and Arch closed her mouth in silent confusion. Sabos read in silence for several minutes, leaving Arch's eyes to wander. Sabos was dressed in the same style of formal suit as he wore the other day, with silver cufflinks and polished black shoes. He read on, his eyes moving over the page. Glasses on his face that he hadn't been wearing the previous day gave him an even more distinguished look. The room was without carpet, but had polished bright wood that matched the walls and long glass windows that let in ample light from the rising sun. Finally he finished his reading, marked his page with a strip of silk worth several days of a normal job's pay, and snapped the book shut. "First, tell me everything about your family debt. Who holds it, how much, when do they pay, everything," Sabos commanded. Unable to bring herself to refuse, Arch told him what he wanted to know. But when she was done, she had to know. "Lord Tien," she began, looking up at him, but he cut her short. "Call me Sabos," he said with a pleasantly open air about him. "Sabos. How will this help my sisters?" Arch asked, cutting to the heart of her true concern. "Simple, in a few days, they will be in this house. Until then, you will remain within these walls. You can consider yourself my guest, or you can assist Solution with the housework, do as you like, but do not venture out," Sabos said, and reached over to the silk rope that would ring for help. Arch's heart raced. So soon? She asked herself, but found no way to disbelieve by the time the radiant maid returned. "Show our guest to her quarters for now, then return. I have something for you to do, Solution," Sabos said, and the quiet maid inclined her head to the master of the house with a smile that froze Arch's blood. A beautiful monster. Her instincts screamed at her with every step as she followed the quiet woman out. Volume 2 Chapter 13. Pandora's actor's first night in the palace looked to be tranquil. No attempted assassinations. Yet. No one asking me to help overthrow the king or soliciting me into a faction. The princess did an excellent job. I must praise Demiurge for finding such a useful tool for the advancement of my father's goals. The sun was down and the only light in the room was that of the candle by which he, The doppelganger, read the book he selected. Really, a nation of complete perverts. He thought to himself until his quiet was disturbed by a knock on the door. Yes? He asked, sitting up in his bed. Ah, it's Climb. I'm Princess Rena's bodyguard, please. My lord, may I come in? The broken voice of a boy nearing earnest manhood carried through the thick wood, and Pandora's actor rose, went to the latch, yanked it to the side, and opened the door. The boy entered, but not alone. A second figure, hooded and cloaked and stooped over like an old woman, rushed in at the same moment, held over the back and at one arm by the young blonde boy. Thank you, Master Gown, thank you, Climb said with his eyes down at the stooped figure he held onto. Pandora's actor raised the dark eyebrow of the man he was imitating, thought for just a blink, and gestured to the table. You're welcome, and please, King Ramposa, take a seat and make yourself comfortable. The stooped figure rose up straight and his escort let him go. The old king threw back the hood that concealed his face and gave a little frown to the magic caster. What spell did you use to tell who I was, Master Gown? I consider myself well versed in magic, as non-magic casters go, and I've never heard of a spell that gave a man's name. The king had dropped all formality in that moment, and it was like seeing another man. For an instant, Pandora's actor could see what he must have been like in his youth, a powerful leader who must have commanded great respect from his warriors. He could easily picture the old king leveling a sword and personally leading a charge into battle. It was difficult not to sympathize with his plight. The doppelganger guardian chuckled and snapped the lock shut over the closed door. No magic, King Ramposa, it was only that young Climb here looked very much like he was holding a tiger by the tail when you entered. Climb, to his credit, was embarrassed. Forgive me, Majesty, I blew your cover without meaning to. Ramposa took Pandora's actor's invitation to sit, and went to sit down in the chair with a heavy grunt. No, with almost anyone else I would have fooled them completely. We made it past a half a dozen nobles without more than a glance when Climb said he was taking a servant to be healed by the new caster. It is just that this one is more clever than most. He raised a respectful chin toward his guest, and Pandora's actor took a seat opposite his host. Still, I never heard of myself being referred to as a groped cat before. He let out a deep chuckle that did nothing to ease the boy's blush. Thank you, Majesty. Climb expressed his gratitude for the forgiveness, but the king had already moved on. I have no time for games, Master Gown, so I won't play them. How powerful are you? Are you on par with Fluda Paradine? King Ramposa asked. And then some. Pandora's actor replied truthfully. I see, then I want to hire you. If I know my Gazif, he's already been here to beg for your help on my behalf. I promise I didn't put him up to that, as he is just very enthusiastic in his defense of the nation. I count that as a credit to the man. But I hope it didn't put you out. Ramposa explained and kept his expression carefully neutral. It's fine. As for hiring me, what do you want me to do? Pandora's actor asked, his estimation of King Ramposa rising up several notches. Most of my nobles think nothing of magic. A few spells obviously are useful. They all see healing magic and divine magic, but most of what they see are just parlor tricks and street performers. But I am an old man, I've seen a great deal, and I know what magic can do in the right hands. To put it bluntly, I want you to win the next war for me, to break the cycle of destruction. I know beyond a doubt that we're doomed, and that the noble faction is actively, if obliviously, helping us fail. Ramposa's face became bitter. Such a shameful, wretched fate. What's that? Pandora's actor asked when he caught the bitter voice. Some of the young nobles in the noble faction, their fathers were boyhood friends, and we were all part of the Brotherhood of Banners. All of us. It was just a schoolboy club when we were little, then it was more. We fought together, saved each other's lives. And then I ascended the throne, and I lost them all to petty concerns within their own houses. His fists clenched tight and whitened the knuckles with the tension. If I help even 1 out of the 100, then I will create 99 malcontents and 1 ingrate. But trying to rob me of Gazif was too much, even for them. Your saving him from the attack by the theocracy may have inadvertently saved this nation already, and now I am preparing to strike back. The king promised through clenched teeth. In a few months, we would normally be mustering over 100,000 peasants to fight the Baharuth Empire. I'm sure you understand the waste this creates. The starvation and lost harvests. If you didn't, I'm sure Gazif explained it. The king's smile was bitter, but his eyes were sharp and hard as a well-forged sword. I don't want to do that again. Instead, I will pay you handsomely, if you'll just turn that magic on the Baharuth Empire. I will offer you land, gold, goods, or ingredients in any combination, a coin, foot, or ounce for every knight killed, with extra for a promise to use your magic for no other kingdom. I will offer you the position of court magus, a noble title, and even to arrange a suitable marriage to ensure you are properly compensated for your service. You have a great deal of confidence in a magic caster whose skills you have never seen. Pandora's actor said tentatively, unsure if his estimation of the king should go up or down, or if his estimation of the Riasti's kingdom's dire situation should go up. I am aware, but that is how grave matters are. I am very old. If I leave my throne to Zanak, nobody will follow him. If I leave my throne to Barbro, he will destroy the loyalty they give to him. My daughter's only value politically is for marriage, though she is far wiser than anyone credits her. Clym stood apart from the conversation, hand on his sword to protect his king, but hearing the king praise his daughter's intelligence was such a surprise that he lost control of his face and his mouth formed a sudden O shape before he forced it to close again. The king looked at Clym out of the corner of his eye. A man should know his children, regardless of their sex. Young man. She is far more clever than most. If I ever doubted that, it was over when Baharuth began adopting some of the ideas we ourselves rejected from her, and they benefited from doing so. Pandora's actor made his decision. His view of the king went up again. If I use my magic for your cause, you won't need to raise an army. I can take care of that for you. But that won't change anything inside your borders. Plus, won't you be weaker? This war seems to provide unity and power from your leadership. If I win it for you, what good will that do in the end? Ramposa gave him a long, steady look. You're a true genius, to see so deeply into the subject. You're right, it isn't enough to win the war abroad, I must win the war at home. I already have a plan for that in the works, Master Gown. I can't ask for your help in that affair. There is another I will be turning to for help. For now, can you tell me your answer? Pandora's actor folded his hands together and closed his eyes as if in thought. You're asking more of me than you know, but I won't deny that the offer is tempting. Let me think about it. I will give you an answer at the conclusion of the feast. Will that be acceptable, Your Majesty? King Ramposa slowly stood up and slid his own chair back under the table. A few days is nothing. I look forward to your response. His charming smile returned and he looked at the borrowed bodyguard when he flung his hood back over his head. Come along, young man, grab the tiger's tail again, then you can go back to your quarters. The king chortled a little when he used the same term Pandora's actor coined, and left the guardian alone. Father, you've truly laid the most masterful of traps for your prey. I am so proud that I am your son. Pandora's actor thought when the iron bolt tapped hard against its place in the stone wall, securing the door shut behind his brief visitors. Sefert could hardly believe his ears. He sat in a chair older than his grandfather and stuffed thick with goose down over velvet, ornate decorative engravings of wild beasts that were so small and intricate you had to look closely and squint to make them out. It was a point of pride that this was his. Sitting in that seat, Sefert felt every inch like he was the bloody emperor himself. But now his face was turned ashen grey and rapidly going ghost white. Say that again, he demanded of the moderately built man who stood a few feet away. A hulking brute stood behind the visitor, and unlike the one who just spoke, this one was silent. He spoke only by his presence and his equipment. Boiled leather armor and a heavy-looking mace. It did nothing to make him more gentle that his large head was shaved bald and he had a few minor scars over a hard-looking face. I said, your debt is being called in, Sefert. The lender said and held out a gracious hand. There have been some questions about your ability to pay, and I'm afraid we require a substantial sum of the total now. My daughter is out on a job, she'll pay when she gets back. Sefert squeaked out. That may be fine then, but we require something now. You can't just borrow more again today as you usually do, not without paying something. The lender's cold brown eyes were telling about his doubts. But Sefert began, and cut himself off. He silently cursed his daughter. Damn you, if you'd just gotten that old goat's rod up this wouldn't be happening. He took a deep breath. We have substantial goods we can give to you as collateral or payment if you like. Sefert said instead of his intended protests. We can extend you additional credit if you offer something of high value. The lender suggested offhandedly, and Sir Fert's eyes bulged beyond his control. What? He asked. There's a premium on young blonde girls right now. You happen to have 2 of them, they're quite fashionable in certain. The lender made a somewhat sour face, scrunching up his cheeks and tightening his lips, revealing his distaste. Circles. Give them up, and we'll be willing to extend you a little more since they're well-bred and well-behaved in addition to their other qualities. I see. I see. Sir Fert said with a neutral, careful voice. They're my girls. I can't. Well, if I do, that will solve the money problem. At least for now. I can acquire some fine things to show off to the other nobles. I'll become an important figure again. Then when the bloody fool on the throne dies, I'll get my position back, then I can find them again. They're my daughters after all, they really ought to do this for their family. It's no different than what that ungrateful girl was supposed to do before, and where is she anyway? Off gallivanting with dirty ruffians, no doubt. Bitterness struck him like the back of her unladylike hand did when she walked out. He recalled her threat to give no more money to him, and that was a problem. I just need time. Time to get my status back, that's all. Sir Fert said to himself and slowly stood up. Wait here, he ordered, and left the room. A few minutes later, he walked Quadruca and Eureka into the room. Their little fingers clung to his left and right hands. In their arms each carried a stuffed rabbit under their free arms, a gift from their big sister. Quadruca wore a red dress, while Eureka wore blue. They looked up at the lender with wide, innocent blue eyes. By now he was a familiar person to them, and so when he knelt down and Sir Fert said, "Go see Master Sanuk," they walked over to the merchant without hesitating. They curtsied like good little noble girls and said at once, "Hello, Master Sanuk, thank you for coming to the Fert house. You're good girls, aren't you?" he said to them in the kind of easy congenial tone that always set people at ease, and they nodded furtively. "Yes, we're good," they said in unison again. The echo game was a favorite of theirs, and they often said the same things at the same moment. It was charming, in the way that children could make things. He gave them an encouraging little smile and put his hands on their shoulders. "You're going to be coming with me, for now, all right?" he asked them, and the twins looked over at their father. He nodded without saying anything, and Master Sanuk stood up straight. He approached the table and removed a small pouch from an inner pocket. He slowly set it down on the table, and the sound of clinking coins of gold tantalized Sir Fert's ears. "Do you want to count it?" "It's the usual sum?" the lender asked, and the blonde fallen noble shook his head. "No, it's fine, I'm sure it's all there," Sir Fert said and stared at the little leather pouch like it was a viper coiled and ready to strike. "As you like, my lord," the lender said, bowed, and when he held out his hands, Quadruca and Eureka trustingly put their hands into his palms, and let him lead them out of their home. When they walked out of the house, Master Sanuk led them just beyond the gate, and waited just as he was instructed. He looked down from one girl to the next, and they, sensing his brown eyes on theirs, looked up at him in return, questions unspoken waiting to be asked. Nothing happened, there was no shout, there was no chase, there was no hint of remorseful second thoughts. He looked back through the bars of the gate. The clear windows gave him a view into the room beyond, and he saw his client finally reach for the pouch, spill the contents on the table, and begin to count. Cold-hearted merchant as he was, Master Sanuk still couldn't help but feel a pang of pity that would likely drive him to drink that night. Such a fool. He thought of the fallen noble, and led the girls away.